This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a journey into the life and, honestly, the really radical insights of Dame Kathleen Lonsdale.
Yeah, she was this brilliant scientist, obviously, but also a really powerful and persistent voice for peace, for justice.
Exactly. And we're working from this fascinating piece from The Marginalian. It explores her path, how she wove together her science and her deeply felt ethics.
And that led her to write that 1957 book, Is Peace Possible? Which feels almost prophetic now.
It really does. So our mission here for this deep dive isn't just to list accomplishments.
No, definitely not. We want to try and unpack Lonsdale's unique mix, that scientific rigor combined with her moral conviction.
Understand where her arguments against war and injustice actually came from based on this material.
Right. And how her experiences shaped those views, and maybe most importantly, why her questions about peace, they still feel incredibly relevant, incredibly urgent for you listening today.
Okay, so let's start with Kathleen Lonsdale herself. Who was she?
The material paints a vivid picture, right? An extraordinary mind from kind of an unlikely start.
Born in Ireland, 1903. Think about that, the same year the Wright brothers first flew.
Wow, yeah.
10th child, a Quaker household, which is significant.
Yeah.
And no electricity back then.
Imagine the large family, those Quaker values, peace, simplicity, and a world just teetering on the edge of huge technological change.
And she had to study science at a boys' school. The options for girls just weren't there locally.
But her talent, it just shone through regardless.
Oh, absolutely. She got the highest score in physics ever at London University at that point in time.
The highest ever recorded. That's just astounding.
It really is. And her scientific career, it really took off when she joined J.D. Bernal's lab, Cambridge.
Right, and Bernal was a pioneer himself. He was the first to use X-ray crystallography on life molecules, right?
Exactly. And Lonsdale, she jumped right in, became a trailblazer in that field almost immediately. Bernal clearly saw something special there. The material quotes him saying she had, such an underlying strength of character.
That she became from the outset the presiding genius of the place.
Presiding genius, that's powerful praise.
It is, and you can see how that strength, that character, it underpinned her actual scientific work. Big contributions.
And the major one highlighted here, her figuring out the benzene ring in her 20s.
Yeah, using X-ray crystallography.
Yeah.
Solved a mystery that had been around for, a century? Since Michael Faraday discovered benzene.
But nobody knew its structure, its shape, its atoms, until Lonsdale.
A massive moment for chemistry, for crystallography. Yeah. But her impact wasn't just the science itself.
No, she was breaking ground for women too, wasn't she? In academia, science. Fields pretty much closed off back then.
Totally. First woman tenured at London's, most respected research university.
Wow.
And then she led these huge scientific organizations. First female president of the British Association for the Advancement of Science and the International Union of Crystallography.
It's just incredible. Paving the way. Okay, so that's the scientist. But what really resonates in this piece is the connection it draws.
Yeah.
Between that intense science and her ethical outlook.
Yes, this is fascinating. The argument presented is that a life in science, especially studying nature at its most fundamental, it requires being, quote, wonder-smitten by reality.
Wonder-smitten. I like that.
By the sheer majesty and mystery of nature. And the idea is that digging into the building blocks of life itself, it sort of cultivates this inherent reverence for life itself.
So it's not just cold, hard facts. It's awe. And this idea that understanding the universe is, what was the phrase? Inviolable cohesion. It's order.
It's interconnectedness, yeah. That understanding somehow fosters a quiet ethic.
And this ethic, this wonder, the material suggests it might be our greatest antidote to self-destruction.
Exactly. Think about Lonsdale again. Her drive is described as this innocent exhilaration, running to the lab.
Doing calculations in the maternity ward.
Right? It's not just work. It's this deep, almost joyful engagement with reality. And the suggestion is that engagement pushes back against our destructive tendencies.
That's a profound idea. Studying life makes you resist ending it. But Okay, while she's in the lab experiencing this wonder, the world outside isn't exactly peaceful. The source mentions World War I.
Yeah, she was a teenager near London. She actually saw the Zeppelin bombings, watched them get shot down.
And that detail about her mother crying.
Crying because she knew German boys were piloting those airships. It wasn't abstract. It was human on both sides.
You can see how that would just sear itself into your mind, ground your ethics.
Absolutely. And the material says she later became this impassioned and indefatigable activist against our civilizational cult of war.
And the military-industrial complex. Quite the phrase.
And importantly, as the source notes, this wasn't like a late-life career change. Her activism wasn't separate from her science.
It ran alongside it, or grew out of it.
Exactly. It emerged right alongside her distinguished scientific career. They were intertwined.
And that commitment, well, it was really put to the test during the next World War, wasn't it? Led to her imprisonment.
Yes, World War II. She was imprisoned as a conscientious objector, refused military conscription, refused to participate in the war effort based on her principles.
And that experience, being in prison, it had a huge impact on her later work.
A massive impact. She became one of Europe's most influential prison reformers. She applied that analytical mind, that ethical conviction, to the prison system itself.
And she connected the prison system back to the military-industrial complex. That feels like a leap for some people.
It might seem like it, but her analysis was sharp. She saw the prison system as, quote, the price societies governed by the military-industrial complex pay for the inequalities and injustices stemming from that foundational cult of war.
So the focus on war creates inequality, and prisons manage the fallout.
That was her view, that prioritizing military power inherently creates a society with deep inequalities, which then needs these vast systems of incarceration. It's a really deep critique.
That focus on underlying structures is powerful. Which brings us to her book, Is Peace Possible? 1957, part of a series asking these huge, urgent questions.
Yeah, and the material calls it perspectival, her unique view and prophetic, seeing things ahead of time. And she wasn't about some simplistic utopia.
No.
No, she was grounded. She said, truisms based on utopias are poor arguments.
Yeah.
She wasn't interested in wishful thinking.
So how did she define pacifism then, if not utopia?
Well, she drew on her Quaker roots, that deep tradition, specifically a statement from way back in 1660.
1660? Wow.
Yeah, it was about refusing to take part in all outward wars and strife for any end or under any pretense, whatever. Total rejection of violence as a tool.
And her own arguments against war, as laid out here, they're just so clear. War is wrong because it's spiritually degrading.
Think about that. For someone so attuned to the wonder of life's cohesion, destruction was a violation. It degrades the spirit.
And it's the wrong way to settle disputes, the wrong way to meet aggression, the wrong way to preserve ideals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But she also had a very practical, almost scientific argument, too, beyond the moral.
Which was?
We're just too interdependent. Simple as that. Harming others inevitably comes back to harm ourselves.
And the example given is that cholera epidemic in Egypt, 1947.
Right. Devastating. 500 deaths a day. But it was stopped fast. Why?
Because 20 nations jumped in, collaborated on vaccines.
Exactly. It showed, as the source says, how our lives are interleaving across artificial pickets of national borders. We're connected, whether we like it or not.
Lonsdale saw that so clearly. Plagues are no respecters of sovereignty.
And neither are the consequences of war, she argued. Economic, moral, spiritual. And in her time, increasingly radioactive fallout. Borders don't stop that.
So her argument wasn't just about the fighting itself. She dug deeper, looking for the root cause. Why do we even have wars?
Precisely. She didn't just focus on the surface conflicts. She pointed underneath to the widespread inequality and injustice that colonialism and capitalism have inflicted on our world. She saw that as the fuel.
That's a heavy indictment.
It is. And her conclusion from that is stark. Real security, she insisted, can only be found, if at all, in a world without the injustices that now exist and without arms.
Security comes from justice and disarmament, not from having more weapons.
That was her firm belief.
Okay, but that's a huge task. How do we possibly get to that world? She wasn't naive, right? She knew change is difficult.
Definitely not naive. The source says she saw two main ways change might happen. Two paths.
Okay, what's the first path?
The first is the compulsion of experience, the whip and spur of historical inevitability, the coercion of facts. She called it the hard and bitter way.
Basically, waiting until things get so bad, until crisis hits, that we're forced to change because there's no other option.
Pretty much. waiting for disaster to compel us.
Not ideal. What's the second way?
The second is the way of foresight, of preparation, of imagination. It's also the way of moral compulsion.
Foresight, imagination, moral compulsion.
Yeah. And she noted this path. Maybe no less hard, but it is not bitter. It requires conscious effort, thinking differently before the crisis, acting on principle.
And the material mentions her involvement in the Pugwash conferences on nuclear disarmament as an example of trying this second path.
Exactly. Pursuing the possible over the probable. Getting scientists and thinkers from opposing Cold War sides together, they actually reached agreements people thought were impossible, potentially averted nuclear war.
So it shows that choosing foresight, choosing the moral path, it can actually achieve things that waiting for disaster might not.
It's about proactively building peace, not just reacting to conflict.
Which leads directly to her call to action. The quote here is quite direct.
It really is. It's a challenge. Those people who see clearly the necessity of changed thinking must themselves undertake the discipline of thinking in new ways and must persuade others to do so.
The responsibility is on those who see the need, on the individual.
It starts with changing our own thinking and then bringing others along.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive on Dame Kathleen Lonsdale, what are the key takeaways? We've seen the scientist whose deep look into the universe foster this profound reverence for life and ethic.
Yeah, and how her own experiences, combined with that scientific perspective, fueled her activism, her tireless work for peace, for justice, for prison reform.
And we've dug into her book, Is Peace Possible? Her clear-eyed view that went beyond just saying no to war, diagnosing the roots in inequality and injustice, stressing our interdependence.
Her vision wasn't just about stopping fighting. It was about changing the fundamental conditions that lead to it.
And she wrote this in 1957, Cold War, nuclear threat looming. But her insights, interdependence, shared consequences, the need for new thinking, they feel incredibly relevant today, don't they? With pandemics, climate change, global economics.
Absolutely. These things don't respect borders any more than plagues or fallout did in her time. And that distinction she made between the two ways change happens.
Right. The hard and bitter way of being forced by disaster.
Versus the conscious choice. Foresight, preparation, imagination, and moral compulsion.
It leaves us with a pretty challenging thought, doesn't it, for you listening? Given the challenges we face now, globally, collectively, individually, are we just waiting for that whip and spur to force our hand?
Or are we actively trying to choose that second path? And if we are, as Lonsdale urged, what does that discipline of thinking in new ways really demand of you? How do you persuade others?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Kathleen Lonsdale's life and wisdom. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.